Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Telling It Like It Is. My name is Jade Alberts, the founder of Peer Guidance. Sharing knowledge and stories is why I started the Telling It Like It Is Facebook Live. It is live. If you have any questions, please put them up there that we will answer them. If you're watching this after on LinkedIn or another social media platform, feel free to ask away and your question will be replied to. I'd like to thank Evolutionize. They're Alberta's mobile optometry clinic for sponsoring this show. A traditional optometry clinic, but they bring their 40-foot Winnebago to you. So today's Telling It Like It Is guest is Khurram Virani, the co-founder of Lighthouse Labs. Khurram, thank you for joining me, and how are you today?
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Jade.
I'm doing great. I was excited about this, and you were like one of the first ones I asked when I talked about the educational side, and we met at the Rainforest Summit here in Alberta. I know you're based out of Vancouver, and I love the Harbor Tower and the steeple in the background. That's the first thing I noticed.
Thanks. Yes.
But, yeah, I know you guys are deeply involved, and yeah, you hired Al as the program director here. I think that's his title. Is that right?
He's actually our general manager, so he runs our entire Calgary location. He's awesome.
Oh, Al is awesome, and I know he's a big part of the rainforest, and I mean that's a great hire, and I'm sure he's going to do wonderful things for you guys here.
For us, very much it's about community integration, and Al is one of the biggest members in the community, and his name is known throughout the tech ecosystem in Calgary, so it was a very easy decision for us.
It's always nice when you have to make easy hiring decisions.
Absolutely.
I'll give a little introduction here, and then we'll get right at it. So Khurram is a co-founder of Lighthouse Labs. Lighthouse Labs is Canada's largest coding bootcamp. Students are immersed with veteran software developers for 8 weeks of guided hands-on modern web or iOS development to become professional software developers. 100% of their alumni successfully secure full-time internship 3 months graduation, usually in the first month. They also work with small business entrepreneurs to get students real life experience. So you co-founded Lighthouse Labs in 2013. So one of the most impressive things that I love, and the stat that I see, is that in 6 years, you've opened up 6 campuses across Canada. What drove you to start the company, and how were you able to expand so quickly and successfully?
That's a fantastic question. And actually, Jade, just so you know, you were, at least for me, you were cutting in and out a little bit. So there was most of what you said didn't make it through to me. So what I'll do is, if you don't mind, I'll give a little bit of a background on Lighthouse Labs and our mission and kind of what we're all about, kind of going a little bit into what you said, and then I'll answer your question if that's okay.
Good.
Okay, so
yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for asking the question. As you mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Lighthouse Labs. My role and title here is head of education. So I'm focused on the product side and can speak to our curriculum and education really, really well. We started in 2013, as you mentioned, and it's a bootstrap business. So not only did we grow, as you mentioned, in 6 years across 6 locations and are now one of the biggest coding boot camps in Canada, we also did that in a self-funded manner. And that speaks to kind of the need for what we do. So what do? We, as you mentioned, we train and upskill the workforce by helping them learn valuable technical skills that help them keep up with the changing landscape that are happening due to technology. Specifically, we have full-time and part-time programs. On the full-time side, we have our flagship program is a web bootcamp, which in 12 weeks, used to be 8 weeks when we started, in 12 weeks, can take somebody from having 0 experience with code all the way to being an employable junior web developer, ready to be employed. And we've been running this for 6 years now. And we also started part-time programs pretty early on. And these part-time programs are less about becoming a software developer and more about understanding what software development is about. So you become introduced to web development, you become introduced to HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And that's more for people like marketers and other non-technical individuals who can really, really benefit from knowing what web development is about, because honestly, it touches everybody these days, doesn't it? So really, our mission and vision is about reskilling and upskilling the workforce to make technical innovation a source of opportunity instead of a threat. And we focus on technical skills, so things like programming and data. So you can think of Lighthouse Labs as a progressive school. And we're in person. It's not a online only education or anything like that. And we have a location, as you mentioned, in Calgary. And we've graduated quite a few people in Calgary. We've started in Calgary as of 2016, I believe, mid 2016. And your question around what drove us to start the company and how were we able to expand so much? So we started in Vancouver in 2013, and we started with a small cohort of 6 people. I was the only teacher. It was very much a bootstrap startup. And today, we've graduated over 2,000 junior developers across Canada. And to put that into perspective, we are now graduating more software developers every year than any other school in Canada, except for University of Waterloo, and we're pretty close in that regard. So we're coming after Waterloo in terms of being the most amount of students graduated in Canada. And to put things into other perspective, because that's quantity, what about quality? Our biggest number that we're most proud of is actually our job placement success. So the bootcamp that I mentioned, 93% of graduates of that program find placement within the first 4 months of graduating. They're able to secure a technical role as a software developer in various different companies across Canada. We started with Vancouver, we grew into Toronto, and we went from there to Calgary and Victoria and Montreal, and Ottawa has just started as of last year. So we're pretty excited about that. In terms of our growth, the reason we grew so successfully is honestly the demand. There's just a huge need in the ecosystem, not just in Calgary, all across Canada, to essentially provide relevant, modern software development experience that is very hands-on and immersive, and is not as long as 2 years or 4 years. Most of the programs that are out there, whether they're in Calgary or otherwise, are usually 6 months and longer. And as we know, most university and college degrees are 3 years long, 4 or 5 years long. And while we don't try to replace those programs, our program is more for career changers. So somebody who has maybe spent a few years in marketing or finance, or has done an arts degree, or comes from a STEM background but just hasn't been able to learn programming. They want to learn that stuff fast and not take another degree. Well, there's very few options except learning on your own, which can be quite daunting and challenging. And then what about the network? What about the community? How do you integrate into that? So our philosophy is very much about community-driven education, where we kind of we don't just have our own little campus. We actually are within a community space working with startups and tech companies and helping them hire from us and actually involving them in the education process as well. So because of our education model and because of the 12-week intensive program, it's very much possible for people who are working professionals in their 30s and their 20s and beyond to be able to take a program like ours and actually change their careers.
No, that's impressive, and I love the fact that you do work in in these co-working spaces. I was at Work Nicer the other day, and there you guys were. I can't remember how many students I saw, but I thought, oh man, that is awesome, because you walk around, all of a sudden a company starts here, and boom, they can walk over there and say, hey, I'd like to hire you, or I get to know you, because people like to hire people they feel comfortable with, so they can start that relationship nice and early.
Absolutely. I mean, we started in Vancouver in a community space much like what you just described, called Launch Academy. And for the first few years we were there, it was phenomenal for us because we were essentially in the startup hub. We had companies working alongside us who were also in hyper growth mode and were looking to hire developers. Guess what? We were graduating developers. We were looking to hire teachers to help teach our program. Guess what? Their CTOs and their software developers could give us a few hours a week, and it was great synergy, right? It was a win-win situation, and we realized that actually community integration is a big pillar for us. When we expanded to Toronto, we couldn't find a community space like that could actually house us, and so we actually created our own community space called DevHub. So if you go to devhub.ca, I believe it is, that is our other initiative, which is a community space for developers by developers. So instead of it being maybe more entrepreneurial focused or more focused on a specific vertical, we're very much focused on producing developer talent across Canada. And we started creating our own community spaces. In Calgary, we haven't needed to bring in DevHub because the ecosystem is so rich already.
Yeah, it is.
And there's amazing places like Work Nicer that we can easily plug into.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm talking to Khurram Virani, co-founder of Lighthouse. If you want to go to their website, just go into the comment section. Click on their link, lighthouselabs.ca. I've also posted Dev Hub up there as well. You click on that link. So, I mean, I know obviously, code and programming is such an important role in tech, and you touched on your curriculum and your job placement success. I mean, your job placement success is off the charts, and I know a lot of people don't like talking about it, but I think that's something that I'd love for you to expand on a little bit.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, we have a 93% job placement across Canada. Most schools tend to report their job placement success at a 6-month thing. So after graduation, within 6 months, X% of people got jobs. We're reporting 4 months after graduation, and our numbers are way higher, and we're extremely proud of that. The reason for that is that we put a lot of emphasis on what happens after you graduate. In my opinion, when you start Lighthouse Labs, you're actually integrating into the community on day one, versus most other programs where, okay, now you've graduated, time to integrate into the community. So because we have a lot of different teachers coming in from various different companies, this community-driven education model that I talked about earlier, it's very easy for our career services team. By the way, we have a career services team that makes sure that they quarterback our students into tech interviews and various different interviews with startups and enterprises in Canada to be able to actually, successfully get those interviews and get those jobs. We don't, a lot of students end up applying to positions that are outside of what we are quarterbacking them into, and that's great, right? Because as we say to students, it's 80% them and 20% us. There's only so much we can do, and our education and our career services team does its best, but ultimately it's about students, right? And our admissions process is another reason why we have such amazing statistics. Not anybody just gets into the program. We have a pretty rigorous admissions process. That's an hour-long interview followed by a few tests, followed by technical interviews. And that's what makes it so that, we are making sure that we're graduating the right kind of people, and employers are happy with the kind of talent that we're producing.
No, absolutely. As long as the employers are happy, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just love hearing stories like that, because I think it was about a year and a half ago, I interviewed Rochelle Matthews, and she was saying in Calgary alone, there was 2,000 jobs available for program developers. I don't know if that's the case today, but she was like, we can't hire enough. Like, there's so many tech companies, so many jobs becoming available that we need companies like yourself. And I guess, that kind of rolls into my next question, talking about Canada's tech industry and Calgary's place in it. What do you see right now in Calgary's tech industry, and is there anything that is needed for it to grow and prosper?
That's a great question. I think the main thing about Calgary is that, as we know, it's been perceived for a long time as being the oil and gas capital of Canada, right? And that's been its kind of focal main kind of position in Canada. And I think it's actually transforming from that into tech and innovation. I think it's going through an industrial transformation. And as I said to you before we even started this interview, our biggest growing campus in Canada over the last year, and what we're projecting for this year, is actually Calgary. So across all the locations that we have, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Victoria, Ottawa, we expect Calgary to be growing in terms of percentage year over year growth is actually the most. And that's because of what we've seen in terms of government support, in terms of hiring partners, the amount of companies that are actually coming to our events that are saying, we need developers, can you please graduate more? We're seeing some amazing momentum there, and it's really, really cool to see. Now, of course, the oil and gas industry is going through its thing, and that's essentially fueling the soil, if you will. Like, it's creating that, it's enriching the soil for all the other industries. And specifically, I think my prediction for Calgary is over the next, let's call it 3 to 5 year horizon, it's going to be on the global map in terms of tech companies that are already in Calgary. So, I mean, Calgary is supported by numerous organizations, right? I don't even see this number of organizations in Vancouver, for example, where I'm located. Companies or organizations like Platform, Startup Calgary, CED, Calgary Economic Development, Rainforest, where you and I met, are just among a few of the organizations that I can list that are just, their mission generally is about Alberta and Calgary, which is phenomenal, right? It's about fueling the tech growth there. There's amazing tech success stories that are like maybe not even just Canadian, but like global success stories. Companies like Benevity, companies like Adabotics, companies like Solium that was recently acquired by Morgan Stanley. It's called ShareWorks now. I recently just yesterday had a conversation with the CTO of Neo Financial. I think they're doing incredible things. They're a startup, and they may not be on everybody's roadmap, but they're going to be a bank, and they're going to be issuing a credit card this year, and it's going to be a very progressive, modern credit card. These fintech companies that are coming out of Calgary are just astonishing. We see amazing investment from the government. Minister Baines recently announced, what was the number? 38 million across 27 projects. And we were part of one of the companies that actually received government funding, which allowed us to grow and continue growing over the next few years and actually invest heavily into Calgary. There's just some phenomenal support coming in from things like Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund, OCIF, and Minister Baines' initiatives. So I think there's just a lot of different initiatives that are all having the shared vision. And essentially what I expect in the next few years is a rapid growth of startups. And I would say that the industries are likely going to be, from what I'm seeing, supply chain is going to be a big one from what I'm seeing in terms of the startup ecosystem there. Fintech, as I mentioned, health is another big one. And I expect maybe game development will be another big one from what I've seen in Calgary in terms of the startups that are there.
Just listening to you talk gets me pumped up. I got goosebumps. It's and one of the things that, and I love hearing that, and I'm in it and I hear it, and I'm down there and a part of it. But one thing that disappoints me the most is we seem to get no love about how good our tech system is here. Everyone says, "Oh, it's floundering," or if the government may cut something here, the local government, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, "Oh, no one's ever going to come here again." And when you're actually here and you're going to these events, and I agree with you, both Platform Startup Calgary and CED are on Telling It Like It Is over the next month. And these companies are so divulged into our ecosystem of tech and promoting it, not only in Calgary, but worldwide, that it needs to be shouted from the treetops.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, to be honest, it's still in its nascent stage in terms of tech compared to like a Toronto or a San Francisco or New York. But again, the trajectory and the year-over-year growth of the ecosystem, I think, is going to be fantastic. And so while I agree with you that it's not on the map, and I think, I do see efforts from Mayor Nenshi, and I do see efforts from the minister in terms of putting Calgary on the map. So I think we're essentially on the cusp of that happening. And very soon we're going to see Calgary being talked about, in my opinion, in Canadian news around tech companies and the success that we see there. And of course, we've seen some news in the tech community itself, but in terms of the general audience, the general public, there's going to be quite a bit of growth there, and I'm pretty excited for that.
Even we were briefly talking about before, the Alberta Technology Symposium is going to be on April 15th and 16th, and we're going to be talking about some of those things, the supply chain and logistics and ag, all different panels and drones and really outside of oil and gas. I don't even think we're going to have an oil and gas panel on there. Like that's much
amazing
growth that we have in this ecosystem right now, that we don't even have to focus on that anymore. And, last year, I think there was 400 or so people, and this year they're planning on being more, and the government is sending members because they want to be involved with it. So I'm seeing a buy-in from all levels really starting to happen right now. And I'm glad to hear, you talk about the $38 million investment, because that's crucial coming as well.
Absolutely.
No, that it is good. And I'm glad to, when you talk about Benevity and Adabotics and those, talk of the HEPA companies, and God, I think it was the Calgary Herald. I finally saw a story about him here like a month ago, and I was like, oh my goodness, finally something that's in mainstream media that's talking about Adabotics.
Exactly. It's starting to happen.
I know, that's great. So I guess let's talk a little bit about what's next for Lighthouse Labs.
Absolutely. So lots of different things. We're, as I mentioned, high growth in Calgary. Calgary is a market that we're looking at very heavily, and we're expecting by 2020 that we'll be graduating about 300 software developers just in Calgary alone. So that's going to be pretty big. And part of that has been because of the funding that has come in from the government. So I mentioned earlier OCIF, that's the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund. There was a recent press release you could find online if you Google Lighthouse Labs and OCIF Calgary. They invested and put forward a funding of $300,000 so that we could continue growing in Calgary. There was Minister Bain's Business Scale Up and Productivity Fund, which invested in many organizations, as well as Lighthouse Labs. $700,000 was committed to us to be able to grow over the next 3 years in Calgary as well. So we're able to put those dollars to actually improving the ecosystem in Calgary by providing more and more workforce into these roles that are really, really hard to fill for tech companies in Calgary. And as I mentioned, I was on a call with the CTO of Neo Financial, and they were saying they're struggling to find senior and even junior talent. Yes, there's a lot of people that are looking for work in Calgary, but at the same time, there's a mismatch, right? There's these companies that are looking for capable talent, and there's a lot of talent looking for work. Our role is in the middle to help convert and upscale and rescale these individuals for these companies. So really, really excited about the growth that we're going to have over the next few years there. The other big one, Jade, is data. So I mentioned a lot of stuff around software development and code, but we are actually starting this year going heavily into data, which is the other part of software. Software is made up of two things. It's made up of code and it's made up of data. And we need to start looking at that more seriously. We've actually created a program. It's live as of this year. It's a part-time program called the Intro to Data Analytics. And this program is live in Calgary as well, the first cohort running in April. It is essentially a part-time course, 6 weeks long, for professionals who are not data analysts, who don't know how to work with data, but they know that they need to understand data and make decisions with data. So let's call them hybrid roles, hybrid analysts, or data-driven decision makers, people like people in marketing, people in HR, people in product, people in finance, who work with analysts or would like to understand analysis more and need to build that data literacy and numeracy skill a little bit and do that on a part-time basis. So we have that course starting very soon in Calgary and across Canada. Really excited for that. And I guess I'll give a little bit of teaser. It's not an official announcement yet, but we're also going to be launching later this year, approximately the summer, a data science full-time program to actually train over the course of 12 weeks data scientists and data analysts that will be graduating across Canada and in Calgary over the summer. And so that'll be our another big growth plan for the year. And we're really excited for that because it, again, works very in line with our mission and what we're seeing in Calgary in terms of the needs there.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to learning more about that, about the data scientists. And again, for anybody who wants to check that out, lighthouselabs.ca, you can just go into the comment section, click on it, and it will take you directly to their website. So, no, that's some exciting news coming in the next this year in 2020 for Lighthouse Labs. That's great. So my last question here, Khurram, is, if you had one piece of advice for a small business startup or an entrepreneur, what would it be?
Great question. I would say, having been through that journey myself many times and having many failed startups before Lighthouse Labs, persistence is key. We tell our students, be comfortable being uncomfortable on day one. We tell them that in the admissions process, that this, you're essentially transforming yourself. You're going through a pretty intensive process. And the same is true. I know I had grueling hours, 80-hour weeks when we started Lighthouse Labs. And you wear many different hats. And while there were many different things, including luck, that made us successful, I would say that we focused on adding value. And that's what allowed us to grow as a bootstrap company, right? We created a product that people needed. We found that need, and then we went full on into validating that product idea and scaling it. So definitely focus on adding value. And if you're looking at doing something that requires investment, don't shy away from it. I know that Calgary, isn't as big on the map as something like the Valley, but there's amazing investment venture funds that have come up in Calgary specifically. So Harvest Ventures is one that I would like to call out there, as well as Thin Air Labs are doing incredible work in specifically fueling startup growth in the tech ecosystem in Calgary and across the prairies. And so that's a very valid option, and you should be talking to organizations like that. Government funding was obviously mentioned, so I won't go into that. And also, don't be afraid to look outside of Calgary for money. One of the trends I'm seeing quite a bit, even here in Vancouver, is founders going out into the US, so Seattle, into the Valley, and actually looking for money to then come back to Canada and build their team here. I'm noticing that venture capital in the Valley specifically is now starting to look outside of their bubble to actually invest in companies where talent is cheaper, where it's less competitive, and real estate is cheaper, and all of those things. And it just makes sense for businesses to actually have their operations over there. So don't be afraid to travel over there, speak to investors there if you need. And it's great for Calgary's ecosystem to bring that money in. So those are I guess, the general advice that I have for up and coming businesses, especially in tech.
Oh, no, that's great advice. And even to expand on that, you talking about, I was at a Silicon Valley pitch here the other day, and there is a group of, I think there's 15 right now that the government has created to take trips down there and get introduced and talk about how to properly get the money, whatever it may be. And they're talking about having your pitch deck. So they are actually there right now as we are speaking, talking to talking to the Valley people. So you're really seeing a drive towards looking for U.S. investments that will come back to Calgary, which is excellent.
I totally agree.
Yeah. Khurram, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and sharing and I love the Lighthouse Labs story, and it's something that you're contributing to the business community in Calgary here, and of course across Canada. And we appreciate that. And I look forward to maybe having you on again and talking about the data scientist side of the business.
Yeah, this was the teaser trailer, right? Once it's live, we definitely should be talking later this year, perhaps. But yes, thank you so much for having me. This was awesome, Jade. And yeah, it was a really good chat.
Excellent. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed it, and we will be back next Wednesday. And I hope everybody has a fantastic Wednesday. And Khurram, thanks again, and we will talk soon.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.